Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Echelon Cycling Podcast. And this is our 11th one, and we have a very exciting week this week. Lots of racing, the Tour of Basque Country, Scale de Pries, and of course, Paris-Roubaix, and a lot more. As always, I'm joined by Outdo cycling creator Patrick and token Yorkshireman, and then as well, Mr. Gregor himself, Ewan Wilson. And guys, what a spectacular finish to the week!
Yeah, literally, I was watching from about 120 k's to go today, and just tuning in because you want to tune in early for Roubaix. Some of the big races you can kind of leave a little bit later, but Roubaix is certainly one which kicks off quite early, and especially when you consider that the move went with the move kind of a big selection was made before 100 k's to go when Wout van Aert lit it up with Christophe Laporte, and it was a really entertaining race, like plenty of hours worth of entertainment. Although there was probably like a bit more of a stagnant period kind of after the Arenberg, where kind of things were quite settled down. So there was kind of like a big action, and then it settled, and then there was big action again at the end. But it was really entertaining. Probably one of the a really entertaining edition of Paris-Roubaix. Really glad that I tuned in for it.
Yeah, it was a pretty good edition of Roubaix. Over the past couple of years, it feels like, I'm including like 2017 into this. Like Roubaix felt a little bit stale every now and then. We get a good edition, but for the most part, it's a little bit underwhelming, overshadowed usually by Ronde van Vlaanderen. I think that this year we got a really, really solid edition of Roubaix that lived up to the expectations, where we have a sort of winner that we not expected. I mean, we did expect, but in terms of like a winner that like feels right. We didn't have I don't know. Let's say if Stephen Kung won this, I feel like it wouldn't have felt as satisfying.
Wait, you weren't satisfied with Dylan van Baarle last year?
I didn't want to mention his name, but he was inferred with that comment.
But I mean, yeah, there was, as we expected, like crashes at left, right, center. Like the Arenberg was just filled with mechanical failures, which was not a good advert, to be honest, for many of the teams. And it was amazing that they finished 1-2, but it was such a shame with Wout van Aert that he kind of, that puncture.
It was, yeah. I think it was. I feel like races are always more entertaining when it's always down to the wire, as is kind of that just kind of makes a lot of sense. But it would be cool if Wout van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel were in the Roubaix Velodrome together, battling out, kind of similar. They went head to head in Flanders a few years ago. It'd be cool to see them go head to head with another iconic monument as Roubaix. So it was a shame that Wout van Aert unfortunately had that puncture, and then Van der Poel just kind of like he just rode for the last 10 kilometers, and it's like, well, it's just a bit of a procession now that he's just going to win, even though Wout van Aert and Pedersen tried their damnedest to really try and bring him back, and the gap was coming down, but it wasn't quick enough. But it was just the performance of Alpecin in Roubaix today was amazing. Honestly, I think that everybody was expecting a bit of Jumbo Visma dominance with their stacked team, with Van Baarle coming back in, who was a bit of an unknown. But I think Alpecin really wiped the floor with them today. I know that Laporte's puncture was badly timed, and definitely his presence in that front group might have made a difference. But Alpecin really made it hard for Wout van Aert today, I think.
I agree. I think Alpecin were really strong today. And they finally got that big team result, because I feel like we often overlook Alpecin, a bit like UAE, where we think like, oh, it's just a one-man show, where Van der Poel, similar to Pogacar, it's like they have to do everything themselves. But this year, they've really come into their own, Alpecin, in terms of working for Van der Poel in these classic races. Søren Andersen was looking really good supporting him as well. We've seen Dries de Bont, and here we saw Gianni Vermeersen and Jasper Philipsen work really, really well with Van der Poel. And I think what they have that maybe Jumbo Visma don't have is like the race savviness of these guys at Alpecin seems to just be a little bit higher. Jumbo, I think, are just too rigid, and rigidity doesn't work at Roubaix. You can't be sort of fixed on a tactic from beginning to end, because it's not going to happen. There's so many like unexpected twists and turns in the narrative of Roubaix. And I think there was some major blunders that Jumbo had where on paper, it would have worked brilliantly if nothing went wrong, but they didn't calculate in the what if something went wrong, and quite a few things did go wrong for them. Alpecin had a couple of things go wrong, but you know what? For the most part, it went pretty well for them in the end. I mean, 0-1-2, it can't get much better than that. And I'm like, I am really happy for this team that they've finally taken that step up, because they are the Mavericks, they are the underdogs of the sort of past 5 years of cycling. I know we often talk about other teams sort of rising through the ranks, but no one's done it like Alpecin. Alpecin. It's a story we've not seen before, really, in the sport, of a team that's come from the second division, risen through the ranks. Remember Corridon Circus back in the day? They were barely a pro-continental squad. And Van der Poel, along with the Roodhofts who have led this team, have just really directed the squad to real success. And the symbolism of Roubaix is probably bigger than the symbolism of Ronde van Vlaanderen. So this feels like a crowning moment for that project.
I mean, they were continental, not even pro-conti back in 2018 with Mathieu van der Poel. So you're right, that journey to kind of this dominant force. But I mean, one of the crucial moments in the race we talked about it on the stream was that at one point you had that front selection group where you had Mathieu van der Poel with his two teammates, but Wout van Aert was by himself, but not contributing, obviously. And then behind, they were trying to get Laporte to close the gap, etc., etc. But it was kind of like just bit all over the place. And even Mathieu van der Poel knew that it was so important to not have this, we called it the Jumbo care package, to come up. And he was even taking part in it. And I don't know what my point was. My point was Mathieu van der Poel's awesome and Jasper Philipsen's awesome as well. But with Wout van Aert, we were talking about the whole Jumbo Visma implosion thing. Do you think Wout van Aert will actually ever win a monument again? We know he's won Milan-San Remo back in 2020, but is he going to take one of these big ones? Watch him win Liège now. But
is he down for Liège? I mean, I haven't looked. I go like a week by week basis to kind of like, because you get to this point in the season, there's kind of a lot to keep on top of. But I know he could line up for Liège or like Lombardia, but it sounds kind of a little bit presumptive to say. But we've gone through another season now where we've gone through a Milano San Remo, Flanders, and a Roubaix, the classic, well, the monuments which suit Van Aert the best of the five. And we've gone through another set of these once again, and Wout van Aert hasn't won either one of them. And although he's incredibly consistent in all of them, it's just, it feels like another opportunity, another set of opportunities missed from him. And it's like, you can say, oh, it's always next year and oh, it's always the year after. But it does always feel like, what if that doesn't happen? What if he just kind of continues to not win it? And it's hard to put your finger as to why it's not happening, because he had the team strength this year. So it's just really odd to try and pin down why it's not happening. I think that he probably will win a monument. I'd be really surprised if he didn't win one again. But I just can't quite put my finger on as to why it's not happening right now. He seems to be on a really good level, a really good team. It's just not going right, and I just can't quite figure it out.
I agree on sort of dysfunctionality of the present. 2020 feels like a distant memory. That was such a strange San Remo. It was the first sort of big monument race of that year where everyone was there and everyone was sort of targeting it. After sort of 5 months of no racing at all, it was strange, and he benefited from that, and he went straight into the Tour de France with great form to help Roglic. It felt more calculated and it felt more sort of fitting. Like, ever since the calendar has sort of gone back to its normal position, it just hasn't worked out, and I'm starting to think that time is running out and the contexts are running out. Jumbo Visma are the best team in the world in terms of classics racing, full stop, point blank, period. They've looked better and better over the years, and the tactics seem to be working quite well in terms of, I mean, at least the other races. How many more signings can they make to solidify this team? They've already signed Van Baarle. They've already signed Laporte. They've done all these things. Remember that in 2 years' time, they won't be called Jumbo Visma. Jumbo are pulling out of the project. We don't know what's next for them financially. Who knows? We also don't know what's going to happen in terms of supporting Vingegaard. Is it going to be a better investment to funnel stuff into the GC team or keep things for the classic squad? Wout van Aert is a good 2-3 years older than Jonas Vingegaard. So it makes sort of more sense. It's a safer investment to go for Vingegaard rather than Wout. However, sort of, if the next sponsor who comes in is from a Belgian or Dutch-speaking place, probably that they will have intentions to bolster Wout's team. And Wout has had a good sort of set of scenarios over the past couple of years where he's been up there, where other riders haven't been. He's had sort of San Remos where Pogacar and Van der Poel haven't quite looked so good in their form, and he hasn't capitalized on them. Liège last year couldn't follow Remco Evenepoel, only came third. Say only. But like there's been plenty of sort of scenarios where you think, well, Wout could have gone that extra mark. I think in terms of explaining why, I think what he just glitches in these high-level races. It's the pressure, it's the team dynamic of it, where the team are so rigid that whenever it goes to these top-level monuments, they just seem to fall apart. This isn't just a Wout van Aert problem. Jumbo Visma have only won 2 monuments over the past couple of years, and they have been so dominant in every sense of the word elsewhere, in sprints, in the other cobble classics and the Grand Tours. They've looked fantastic, but they've only got the Roglic Liège-Bastogne-Liège victory in 2020 and Wout van Aert's 2020 Sanremo victory to their names. It's starting to look like this is a bigger Jumbo Visma problem, and it could be down to their rigidity in tactics. And also just the fact that they crumble under the fluidity of a monument setting.
I mean, it is a bit harsh on us for this Paris-Roubaix because it was a puncture. And I mean, even if it all went back together again, he wasn't going to win that anyway because he lost the sprint for second place. So it would have been Jasper Philipsen winning.
Exactly. But imagine if Christophe Laporte was there or Nathan van Hooydonk was there. If Nathan van Hooydonk was right at the front of that group on the Arenberg, following the wheel of Mads Payson and Pippo Ganna, he bridged up to that front group and he was strong enough to hang on into that group of 7 right towards the end. Wout has his problem. Nathan van Hooydonk is right there to help him. Van Hooydonk paces back. It could have been closer in the end. He might not have been able to win, but it could have been a lot closer if we had that scenario. But Jumbo did not place riders far up enough in that group to bridge up because they thought they were safe with Wout and Laporte, because that has worked on so many occasions at the Tour de France, at the Paris-Nice, wherever. All these little Belgian races, it's worked. But at Paris-Roubaix, that's not how you win the race, I'm afraid.
I liked what you said earlier about how they can throw as many signings as they want to, but at the end of the day, actually, although however many signings they make, it's like they're trying to trick people into thinking, oh, but we've made all these signings to try and distract you from Wout van Aert, whereas everybody still knows that they're trying to push Wout van Aert to be their leader in the Cobble Classics. It's like, yes, they would be very happy with any one of their riders winning a monument, but actually they kind of want Wout van Aert to be the one to do it. And it doesn't really matter how many riders you throw at that to support him. At the end of the day, Wout van Aert, like you say, just tends to have these moments where he doesn't perform in the biggest monuments. It just, for some reason, doesn't work out. And that's not really a thing which you can solve by throwing more riders at it. It's just a thing that they have this, I don't know whether Wout van Aert just isn't suited to it in whatever reason, or maybe it is just bad luck. It was bad luck that he had a puncture at the time where he did today. It's very possible that he could have won Roubaix today in a sprint with Mathieu van der Poel. It was just unfortunate, his puncture. But that's just things you have to be lucky sometimes.
Would they have worked together because Jasper Philipsen wasn't too far behind?
True.
Other things to factor in here. But what I'm starting to think with Wout van Aert is that he's a very good rider, but he's not the best in the world at anything. In terms of monument racing, Mathieu van der Poel has risen to the occasion on so many more monuments than Wout has. Sprinting, Jasper Philipsen is better on the flat sprints, as is probably Fabio Jakobsen and Tim Merlier maybe as well. In time trialing, Pippo Ganna is better on sort of a flat time trial profile, maybe even Remco Evenepoel. Then looking towards sort of the Helia profiles, well, we're just sort of looking at other riders, maybe Mathieu van der Poel, Pogacar, these other guys a little bit better. Wout van Aert's very, very good at a lot of things, but he's not the best one at anything. And I think that's what sort of sets him apart from these other riders. If he's targeting a monument, his sort of ceiling of level is not quite there in terms of Pogacar's much better at hill. Van der Poel's kick is much better. The sprinting powers of Philipsen, sprinting powers of Jakobsen are so much higher, where Wout just can't go there. That's why we see Wout so dominant at stage races and Grand Tours, I think, is because like other people get sort of, they wear down a little bit, and that's where Wout really shines. Even if you look at the past couple Tours de France, Wout kind of comes into his element later on into the race. The 2021 was different. That was a strange calendar. Even the 2022 one, he was there at the beginning, but he didn't win the time trial, didn't win any of the sprints in Denmark. I think it just goes to show he's good at a lot of things, but he's not the best at anything. A bit like Sagan, in terms of the fact that Sagan was really good at a lot of things. He only won 2 monuments in his career, and he was undoubtedly one of the biggest characters, one of the most commanding classics figures and monument riders of his generation. It's very similar to Wout.
I don't think any other rider has been as dominant as he was last year in the green jersey. He won it in Paris-Nice, Dauphiné, and the Tour de France. I've never seen that before. No one cared about that either, which I thought was really such a unique achievement.
But he capitalized on the fact that he's good at a lot of things. But Wout
exactly, so that's why he suits the points classification.
Exactly, but he never won a bunch sprint. He never won a mountain stage. He never won a hilltop. He won that stage into Calais, but he won it solo. And that was also thanks greatly to his team support. There's never really been a standout Wout van Aert performance that we can look back on and say he was the best on that day, hands down, in terms of a monument. I'm struggling to find a sort of a day there. Even in terms of Tour de France stages, looking back, apart from that stage in Calais, sort of thinking, oh yeah, he was like just head and shoulders above the rest. I'm excluding time trials because that one's pretty self-evident.
It would have been interesting to see if they were in the velodrome together, because I'm not sure Mathieu van der Poel would have won that sprint, considering all the effort he put in to keep away the Jumbo Visma care package.
I have a feeling it would have been closer than you think, because what we've seen Wout van Aert do particularly well at is sprints from a slower starting point, because he has a better acceleration than Wout. Wout is very good at sprinting when you come in from speed, but this is the Roubaix Velodrome. You're going to have a slower speed. We saw it when Wout brought Philipsen into the Velodrome. Wout slowed the pace down. They went to the top of the Velodrome and sort of did a track sprint. If we came down to a track sprint, Van der Poel would have won. We've seen it in cyclocross so much. We saw it at the Ronda in 2020. That's my opinion.
I'm just saying, because of how many turns Mathieu van der Poel did, I think he did so much work, and he tried to split the group so many times. But we'll never find out. Thank you, Puncture. But anyway, moving on, I think let us know down below if you think that if Wout van Aert is ever going to win Monument again. And I think we all kind of have our question marks over that. Maybe in the right conditions, but you never really know. But in Paris-Roubaix 2023, there was one controversial incident that I think we should just touch on. John Degenkolb, a former winner, he was in the group, and then this unfortunate crash happened. And a few people were calling for Mathieu van der Poel's head, which seemed mean. I don't know. Paris-Roubaix, discuss.
I remember I saw it, and I did think, like, I love you, Mathieu, but that was a bit. I think it was just clumsy, and I think you can forgive somebody for being perhaps a bit clumsy at the end of Paris-Roubaix, where you're just using every ounce of energy just to really focus on staying upright and the tactics which are going on, and just trying to actually just pedal. Making a positioning kind of blunder like that is probably quite easy to do. I could see why he was doing it. I think he was trying to go for the gap between Philipsen and Degenkolb in hopes of detaching Wout van Aert from his wheel, making it harder for Wout to follow him, and therefore his attack would in theory be more successful because Wout van Aert wasn't on his wheel. However, Philipsen then closed that gap, which forced Van der Poel into Degenkolb, which then forced Degenkolb to crash. Should Van der Poel have received some kind of punishment for that? I think it's hard to do, because by the time that you would have been able to give him the punishment, there's like 10Ks to go. You wait for him to cross the finish line, and then the UCI say, no, you didn't win because you crashed out Degenkolb. That would cause all kinds of havoc, just controversially. And I just don't think it would be something which the UCI would be brave enough to do, quite frankly. It's very hard to say what should have happened there, because it's, I know he crashed out Degenkolb, but let's say it was Wout van Aert in that position. Would the consequences be different? Would people be thinking differently? If, Degenkolb, no disrespect to him, but he wasn't the favourite in that group. If it was somebody more influential to the race who Mathieu van der Poel crashed out there, a direct rival in Wout van Aert, for example, would that be worthwhile of further action, or seen as being a premeditated move to try and wipe out competition? Or was it just a clumsy accident, and it was just one of those things which happens rarely and doesn't really warrant that much more discussion?
It's hard, isn't it? It feels like it was a racing incident, to be honest. It's the cobblestones, riders don't have control, they're going blah, 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 all across the road, and these guys are at their limits. This is the most important part of the final 20 kilometers of the race. Everyone wants to be there. And Degenkolb came a cropper. It is heartbreaking as well, just sort of seeing him. He comes off, he tries to get back on his bike, and the chain is down, and he knows that's it. It's gone, and he's not going to have a chance like this ever in Roubaix again. I think that's what makes it particularly sort of emotional, is that it was John Degenkolb, a guy who's overcome so much. Since he won the last Roubaix, he was in an awful accident in Spain that wiped out the chances of many people on his team, and he's had to build up from that. And he took that Tour de France stage in Roubaix in 2018. He switched teams a number of times. We're just thinking, what's he going to bring now? back at DSM. It's like a homecoming. And he finally got that chance in Roubaix to show everybody what he's got. And everything fell into place for him. He was in a great position and boom, it's all gone. It's like, I think that the sort of the pathos of the incident is stronger than the motives of it. I think there wasn't really anything there. I don't think we should be reading into it too much. I don't think they can really sanction either Van der Poel or Philipsen. It's just a shame that it took out Degenkolb.
Yeah, it would probably have been a bit different. And we said this on stream if it was on the flat and not on the cobble section.
Yeah.
Because you have so much less control over your bike on those cobbles. It's just dreadful.
And there's also some sort of risk in the fact that sort of riding on the grass as well. That sort of the battle for the maybe like 50 centimeters of verge that you can ride on that everyone's trying to fight for. That makes it very exclusive to a cobblestone race like Roubaix, where we can't really compare and contrast. There probably aren't rules of precedent here from commissaires on how to rule on this, which is quite important in terms of sports law, I guess.
It was like, do you remember Tour de France 2 years ago when there was a breakaway and Bob Jungels swiped across the road and wiped out Higuita? Is it not kind of like that? Was Bob and nothing happened to Bob Jungels there, from what I can remember. I don't think he was DQ'd or anything.
Nothing happened. That was on the road out of Lyon going to the Grand Colombier. Higuita crashed out of the race completely and he didn't carry on. I think Jungels eventually abandoned the Tour de France, but there was no repercussions on him. But I guess that's slightly different because it was such a sort of huge movement that he made where he went right across the road. Whereas this one, it's slight movements. If this were a sprint, it'll be a different matter. But I think sprinting has a different sort of cookie cutter of rules and asterisks that we could look through.
Yeah, it's all just such a grey area, isn't it? Because the jurisdiction applies in a sprint, but doesn't apply elsewhere on the road. And it's just a tricky thing, which, what does the UCI do about this? Because clearly, if people go around just smashing into people and nothing's done about it, then that's no good either. It was probably just a freak thing, but the UCI maybe look at their rules. And because, what's his name? The dude who crashed out like most of the peloton in Flanders, he was DQ'd, but is that just because he wiped out so many people?
That was reckless.
Yeah, it was reckless, but could you also call Mathieu van der Poel's thing reckless? Where do you draw the line?
That's the line.
That's the line. How many people is it? Just a threshold in people? If you wipe out more than 10, then that's a DQ. But if you wipe out 9, it's fine.
That's like American murder laws, where like if you kill 5 people, you get 5 life sentences. Yeah. It's based on how many people you take down. That's how many months you have off, or how many positions you lose, whatever. Yeah. But it is a big grey area. I think there's a lack of sort of precedent before. I think that if the Mathieu incident happened last week on an uphill, which probably wouldn't, but let's say hypothetically it did, then I feel like it would be very different. I mean, for instance, in the Paris-Roubaix FAM, there was a cobble sector. There was a crash that took down the whole group of favourites apart from one of the riders from AG Insurance. I know it's different, but in terms of like, is there anyone to blame? Is there anyone really to sort of point a finger at? I think that this time, because it was so close between those 3 riders, it does make it seem like there's a line of accountability, but I don't think there is accountability really to be held in Van der Poel or Philips's court more than it is in Degenkolb's.
It is a good point though. If it is Wout van Aert going down and not John Degenkolb, does something happen? Yeah, I think that's a good point, Patrick, because
all that would happen is there'll just be more fury on cycling Twitter, probably.
Jumbo Visma are bankrolling the UCI Commissaires Board conspiracy debate. I'm kidding, of course.
Yeah, people, please don't. We're just joking.
Yeah, no.
Please.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
David Lappartient, please don't come for us.
You can come on if you want. Apart from Mathieu van der Poel almost crashing into a barrier that was put up by the UCI ASO. I mean, anyone else would have crashed on their bike. But more importantly, his teammate Jasper Philipsen. I think we should talk a bit more about him because, not only did he finish second, and like many of the riders in that 7-man group got a PB in Paris-Roubaix. Apart from Wout van Aert, he's just an absolute machine right now. Best sprinter in the world. We saw in the Scheldeprijs, basically. And now finishing second in a Paris-Roubaix. What other pure sprinter has done that? Mark Cavendish, when he was the best sprinter, was certainly not doing that. Kittel was not doing that. So, yeah. What a weapon.
And also add in the fact that he won Brugge de Panne the other week as well. Yeah. And he won on the Champs-Elysees and he's done all these big things. It's really positive. Maybe he's the new Wout van Aert. Who knows? He can deliver in the monument. JK. But he's only 25 years of age, and he turned 25 this year, so he's still young. Remember, Phillips has been around since 2019, winning World Tour stages, so a sign of strength, and he's got real command of Alpecin de Koenig. I think it's a big motivation boost for him. And now, especially since Tim Merlier is gone, he doesn't have to have debates about who the strongest sprinter is in that squad anymore. He is. He should go to the Tour de France. He should be the number one sprinter throughout the calendar. And now that he's got this result in Roubaix and Brugge de Pana win, Cel de Prijs, he has the confidence of everybody around him. I feel like Jesper Philipsen is probably one of the most confident sprinters in the world right now, and he has every right to be, especially when other contenders for the spot, Fabio Jakobsen, Tim Merlier, have a couple more question marks around their name.
I mean, anyway, not talking only about Paris-Roubaix, there was one of the biggest 1 week stage races in Spain going on as well, Tour of Basque Country. We got our first ever Danish winner this time, Vingegaard. But yeah, what exactly happened in this very delightful race?
I feel like Ewan's better at the recaps than me. Jonas pretty much just dominated the whole GC scene pretty much, didn't he? I think I was hoping for more competition. I mean, there was some really good stages. I mean, there was a bit of a sketchy sprint which Edith Skelling won, but it was a good week for Bora as well because they got a stage win with Higuita. There was some also really good surprising performances from riders like Mauro Schmidt was looking really good as well. Felix Gall was once again a really good performer. I know there was quite a lot of hype. He did good in the Tour of the Alps last year, and then there was a lot of hype going into the Giro for him. So we'll wait and see whether he can live up to more this year. I'm expecting good things from him this year. But, then there was also, Enric Mas, Gaudu, the kind of usual suspects who were all filling out the top 10. Everybody was looking on a similar level, apart from Jonas, who was really just flying away from people, especially on stage 6. I mean, he literally was he just rode away. I remember Mas was like on his wheel, and then Jonas just went, see ya. And that was it. It was a decent week of racing, but it really lacked the mountaintop finish, which we come to expect from the last stage of Basque Country. And I think that was quite missed, considering that we only had one steep finish, which was where Higuita and Juanpe Lopez collided in the last few hundred meters. Do you remember that? That was kind of funny in a way.
It was a silly moment, silly cycling season. And I think we can almost crown our champion for the most underwhelming stage race at the UCI level of the year. Congratulations, Tour of the Basque Country. Here is your trophy. I want to dedicate this to Jonas Vingegaard and Jumbo Visma for being dominant but boring, and Mikael Landa for being typically Mikael Landa and missing that.
Whoa!
I'm sorry.
When Pogacar does it, it's incredible. When Jonas does it, it's boring. Excuse me.
I'm being facetious, using every vowel in the alphabet. It was fine. I think it's just the fact that this race continues to be underwhelming because it's at a really inconvenient part of the year where it's in between Ronde van Vlaanderen and Roubaix. I don't know why this has been allocated as the spot for Basque Country, but it is. As such, it has a very sort of second tier list of competitors sometimes. It is rather underwhelming. Jonas Vingegaard was convincing throughout, I think, that victory where Juanpe Lopez accidentally gave him the win. But he was actually very convincing on that climb where he did dance away from everybody. Yeah, I mean, Vingegaard won. I think it's just like the sort of there's something about Pogacar, but I think it's also about his sort of physiology and the way he rides the bike. There seems to be this like visual panache, like the way he rides is so aesthetically pleasing. But Vingegaard looks labored on the bike. It looks like he's just getting a job done. And then in the post-race interview, he just gives us sort of a paint by numbers response. And I don't know.
It was a really good race. I can't do a Vingegaard.
That sounded like Sean Kelly there for a second.
Who knew I had Sean Kelly? No, we have to go for you for the impersonations.
Sean, it was a really good race. Jonas
Vingegaard.
In the Tour of France, he's a favorite. Sean, if you're watching, DM me. Nevertheless, for Vingegaard, yeah, I mean, it was decent. He got the job done. It's typical Vingegaard, really. It's just executing a plan. Landa sort of missed the mark. David Gaudu let me down. We all know what David Gaudu can do, and apparently that's 4th place at Tour of the Basque Country. We need to wait for Gaudu, Godspace Gaudu, in France. He's going to come back. He's going to be back fighting at the Dauphiné. Mark my words.
Natural question here. Is Jonas Vingegaard now the favourite for the Tour de France? Because Tadej Pogacar has worn himself out with too many cobbles and whatever. So now Vingegaard is just going to sail to the victory again.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the tricky thing of that, but no offense to the rest of the guys there, but it's kind of like hit his competition there. I mean, at the same time, you could say that Godou was beating Vingegaard at Paris-Nice, but then he was being beaten here. Is that just because Godou only cares about winning in France?
As he should.
It could be.
His
Maybe it's just like, you know what?
his head's elsewhere. He's thinking about these pension reforms in France. And also, it was the national strike on the 6th of April. His mind was probably with that. He's channeling his inner Blaireau, his inner Bernard Hinault into this. We all knew David Godou was a socialist fighter. We only did. Anyways, carry on.
Yeah, but there was no Pogacar here, which is always kind of tricky. Ineos was certainly not firing on any cylinder, really, apart from Ethan Hayter. Hayter won the first stage, which was a miracle considering that he wasn't ever back of the peloton. That was pretty entertaining, the fact that he was actually towards the front. And to be honest with you, Hayter has been a little bit underwhelming this season, so it was kind of nice to see him actually kind of getting off the mark, to be honest with you. And that was really Ineos's main takeaway from the week was his victory. You know, Danny Martinez didn't really do anything. Luke Plapp again didn't really do anything, which I was a little bit let down by. Although he was a late addition to the start list, it must be noted. But Ineos, once again, just a little bit underwhelming. So Jonas's competition wasn't that great, but I certainly think that winning a stage race is a good confidence boost, considering that Pogacar has already won quite a few things so far this year. I think it's good for Jonas to really kind of stamp his victory in there. It's kind of like Pogacar's racked up a few, and Jonas has kind of retaliated with a Basque Country win, which, you know, although, like we said, it was a little bit underwhelming, perhaps it was still a victory of a World Tour stage race. So, you know, it gives Jonas and Jumbo a little bit of confidence. You know, if Jonas lost, let's say Jonas didn't win this, there would be some question marks about his ability going forwards. But his victory does, you know, reaffirm that, yes, he is still Jonas and he is still good and he is still the reigning Tour de France champion, and we shouldn't just forget about him.
Okay, I'm going to say one thing that's going to... Anyone who's a fan of Jonas Vingegaard is going to hate this stat, but since, well, how far are we going to go back? The last 30 years? Yeah, I think 30 years. Yeah. There's only been one winner of the Tour of Basque Country who's gone on to win the Tour de France, and that was Alberto Contador back in 2009. So that's not a great stat for Vingegaard. Is he better than all of these riders? Hopefully, but as well, one thing we didn't really speak about that podium. We only Vingegaard and nobody else really mattered. But Landa and Ion Izagirre finishing on the podium for a 6th time in his career. I think that's quite crazy.
It's good in terms of local support. Landa and Izagirre, both Basque riders, but look at this top 10. Are any of them winners? No offense, but like, in terms of sort of there being like a step up, I feel it more in terms of like modern cycling, where we are now in the 2020s to where we are in the 2010s, where victory is concentrated only within a small pool of riders. Is Mikel Landa a winner? Infamously not. Jonas Vingegaard, yes. The man finishes third. That's kind of his place. Enric Mas, the man has come second on so many occasions, but never gets number one. Brandon McNulty, he's called Brandon McFalty to some for a reason. Like these guys aren't really winners. Maybe Simon Yates is the first name I would see on that list and think, he should probably be higher. But none of these guys really are sort of going to be threats for the Tour de France. These aren't guys who win stage races. If we had he can't really race against Roglic, but if we had like a Roglic of 2019 Bernal, or like Geraint Thomas, one of these kind of riders, Adam Yates, whoever, like competing against him, then I feel like we could sort of lift this stage race victory higher. But I agree, though, it is a UCI World Tour stage race. We shouldn't sort of poo-poo it, and it is going to be a big motivation booster for him. On this podcast and sort of in the general cycling discourse, we're oscillating between, is Pogacar the best? Is Vingegaard the best? Every week we seem to be jumping in different camps. So what we now need is for Vingegaard to win a monument, and I think we're on the same level between them going into the Tour de France. If Vingegaard wins Liège, Tadej's washed.
I'm not even sure he's going to Liège. He's not.
I was going to say he shouldn't go. But if he really wants to sort of no, but in terms of it doesn't really suit his interest. He's not a classics rider. Why would he go? He should probably be training elsewhere instead. That's why. It's not like a sort of comment. I think he should be doing other things, being more productive with his time.
So as we concluded from this, Jonas Vingegaard is the favorite. He's going to win the 2023 edition and 7 more tours, probably. But I mean, the one thing I think we should go through, because Ewan brought that up now. Yeah, Jumbo Visma, they love to announce their squads like weeks before everyone else, which is helpful to anyone doing a preview. But this Giro team,
I also want to say that it also buys into their rigidity that we spoke about earlier on, where announcing a squad this early on in the season, it just means that like, oh, there's no room for change, and if you do, then it's a huge inconvenience because they fixed their whole season towards this point. It's worked for them evidently over the past couple of years, but it is so rigid. I think that just goes to show that they aren't sort of as fluid as other teams, particularly UAE Team Emirates, but the Giro squad's got.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally in stark contrast to, like, you're talking about the rigidity of Jumbo Visma. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's EF, who released their squad. Like, they walk up for the team presentation for the tour, and I'm like, oh, this is their team. It's just like you never know until the last minute. And I feel like that really shows the kind of rigidity versus like the loosey-goosey, kind of like slightly hipster EF with their Palace collaboration and their bucket hats. You know, that's just like the perfect comparison between the two as to when they release their start lists. It is helpful for us as people who make previews, but yeah, I can see what you mean about the rigidity. I think it is actually quite a good point how it is just like, this is the team and we will not stray from this team. And meanwhile, other people are like, oh, you know, yeah, exactly. It's just like these 8 people, Avengers assemble, that's it. Nobody else, no room for anybody. Whereas other people are kind of like, we'll wait and see what happens in these races, the Ardennes. We'll see, you know, if people come up in good form, we'll send them because that makes sense. They've proven themselves. And it's all about kind of proving in that kind of slightly older guard kind of style of thinking. Whereas Jumbo are kind of not embracing the old guard kind of loosey-goosey style of play. They're just like, nah, we're just going with.
We haven't mentioned the team.
Yeah, who is on that team?
Wilco Kelderman. He's the headline, I would say. Oh. No, shit, sorry. He's not on the start list. That's the headline.
I was going to say.
Wilco Kelderman's not going to the Giro. I was going to say. I said it. I was like, that's incorrect. Spreading misinformation once again. I admire Jumbo Visma. Do you reckon they announced the team this early on so they can like book plane tickets? They don't have to mess around with like late name changes on the plane tickets because that costs quite a lot of money. So like if they have all these flights booked from like their intergalactic altitude camp to Italy, and it's set in stone there, like where their riders are going to be. It's great for human resources. But the team, yes, let's dive into it.
Yeah, I was going to say.
A tangent and a half. The team is Primož Roglic leading it with Eduardo Affini, Sepp Kuss, Robert Haysink, Michael Heisman, Tobias Foss, Koen Bouwman, and Jan Tratnik. I mean, some of those riders you would expect to be here. Kuss going to the Giro instead of the Tour is interesting. Tobias Foss as well going to the Giro instead of the Tour is similarly quite interesting. And Michael Heisman, guys, I'm surprised.
I am surprised, but it's kind of... Yeah, it is surprising, actually. I was going to try and provide a contrary point, but no, it is surprising. That's just how it is. He's a very young rider and unproven, and that does kind of go against Jumbo Visma's we go with guys who are quite tried and tested in Grand Tours, especially for one where they're definitely expecting. They're hoping that Roglic he is a main favourite, and therefore you would want people with experience around him. There are those experienced people. There's Kuss, Robert Hessink, Affini, you know, guys who have done multiple Grand Tours now. I do feel a bit sorry for Tobias Foss, considering that he always gets sent to the Giro. And, you know, that's happened for the past 3 years that he's been sent to the Giro. And I know that he's the world time trial champion. I know that's kind of like put a bit of an asterisk next to it because it was a very kind of unexpected one. And perhaps he hasn't lived up to that TT performance kind of this year so far. But as a world time trial champion, would Jumbo Visma not want to be rolling that out in the Tour de France, considering that there are, 2 TTs to show off the rainbow stripe?
There's only one time trial in the Tour de France, and it's towards the end.
Whereas the Giro does have 3 TTs. Actually, no, forget what I said then. It makes far more sense to send Foss. But I do still feel a bit sorry for him. I think he does kind of deserve to go to a Tour after 3 years of like just being shunted towards the Giro. But at the end of the day, he hasn't quite lived up to the hype since kind of like his under 23 days.
He was 9th. He was top 10, but granted, the shoes he was filling, predecessors, Tadej Pogačar and Egan Bernal.
Yeah, I think it's a good team, to be honest with you. I think it's just solid. It's fine. Like, it'll support Roglic in all eventualities.
Imagine what this team could do on a triple T, a team time trial. It would be lethal. But there is no team time trial. It's a strong squad. Michael Heisman, yeah, he is a bit of a surprise. If you don't know him, he was third last year in the Tour de l'Avenir, the race won by Tobias Foss back in 2019, which is why it's kind of surprising. And Tobias Foss, not going to lie, he's been underwhelming me this year as a domestique. Not there in Paris-Nice. Early season racing, not quite there as a domestique. You would expect more from him given his abilities elsewhere, and he's been able to chase his own success, but he's been given that chance quite a lot. Maybe they're just thinking we could take him to the Giro because he's a bit faulty. If we take him to the Tour de France, then maybe it won't work out, and we need the Tour de France team to be sort of defrosted and ready for the big events where they have reliable riders who they can bank on. But no Kelderman here. He was scheduled early on in the season to go to the Giro, which is why it's a bit of a surprise that he's not here. But at the same time, I think I still stand by my point from last year when we spoke in transfer talks about Wilco Kelderman. I think he will be the pivotal rider in this year's Tour de France. He is such a good rider. He will be the game changer in the mountains. I think he's too valuable of an asset to not bring to the Tour. And given that he's coming back from a crash as well, his timeline to the Tour de France makes a lot more sense than sending him straight away to the Giro. Roglic will be fine. He's got Kuss. I'm quite happy to see them reunited, actually.
Jonas Vingegaard is going to be sad not having Kuss there, but equally, if they're going to try and do this double Grand Tour attack here, plenty of riders in here with a lot of Giro success. Jan Tratnik winning a stage, as we know. Koen Bouwman winning 2 stages and the blue jersey. Sepp Kuss has only done the Giro 1 time. Affini as well has been at the Giro before. Robert Hessing, 36 years young. Yeah, wealth of experience, as we know, but I mean, the main man is Primož Roglic. Will Roglic be happy about this? Will he like this squad?
Yeah, I mean, Kuss is the big thing here. I mean, when we think of Roglic dominant mountain performances, Sepp Kuss usually comes with it. He's been up there since the sort of paradigm shift throughout 2020 into 2021. Last year was a bit of an anomaly. Kuss, I don't think, was great whilst riding for Vingegaard last year at the Tour de France. Maybe the squad saw that and they thought, well, we'll send him to the Giro because he works really well with Roglic. They've been working so closely for a couple of years now that it just makes more sense to send him there and to have other guys working for Vingegaard at the Tour de France. And maybe Kuss will get parachuted into that squad if something were to happen. It makes an awful lot of sense. I feel a bit bad for Jan Tratnik because he has been looking like one of the best Swiss Army knife riders in the world right now, and I think he slots in so well to a Tour de France squad. I mean, time will tell, but I think he's going to be a really, really good rider at this Giro, a real strong all-rounder.
But anyways, with that out of the way, we might as well get to our favorite part of the show, and that is the Rider of the Week. And of course, there's plenty of choice for any Scandinavian. No, I'm not throwing Scandinavia in there. Any Danish fans? Well, we'll go with Ewan first this time. And Ewan, who's your Rider of the Week this week?
My Rider of the Week is Jesper Philipsen, because I think this shows a big sort of shift for him and a big sort of proof of strength. Winning Cel de Prace is a big W. It's the Sprinters World Championships, unofficial, that everyone wants to be there. It's a lot of really top guys were at that race. And then to win that and to finish second in Roubaix, and he looked like one of the best riders there, to be honest. Even without Van der Poel, I think he still would have finished either first or second, 100%. And yeah, it's big for his confidence going forward. And I'm really happy to see him doing well. And still, at the age of 25, who knows what's next?
I was kind of good. I was going to pick him, but I've got a backup.
Yorkshire.
Connor Swift was riding on the front today. So whether that's worthwhile, I don't really know. It did something with Benton, it wasn't in Roubaix. But anyway, it would be easy to go with Jonas, but I just feel like it's just, I don't know. It's not exciting enough for me. So I'm going to go with Mauro Schmidt, because I think that he was incredibly consistent at Basque Country. And he finished like 11th in GC. And I think ahead of the Ardennes, I know there is also Alaphilippe there, but I'm also very much looking forward to seeing what Schmidt could do in a Brabant-Sepel, in an Amstel Gold Race, considering how he looked at the World Championships last year, where he did really well over 60 odd kilometers. If that group stayed away, he would have potentially finished on the podium. Let's not forget. So I think I'm really looking forward to seeing what Schmidt can do in the upcoming Ardennes. And I know he didn't win anything in Basque Country, but he was just very consistent, arguably one of the most consistent riders in that race.
I could pick Mathieu van der Poel. I also have 3 choices of Danish riders who won stage races, and I am going to pick one of them, and he's not called Jonas Vingegaard. He's called Alexander Kamp, because Kamp has been up and down in his career. He's riding for the Tudor Pro cycling team now. And yeah, first stage race, I think he almost won the Tour of Yorkshire few years ago. I know you don't like that race, Ewan. Well, it doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, so Alexander Kamp, good win for him. Good win for Tudor Pro Cycling as well. I think it's their first stage race, if I'm not mistaken.
First one probably at the professional level. They were sort of a youth team last year.
Yeah, okay.
Used to race. I saw them at the Alpecin Tour last year, for instance.
That is basically it for our 11th episode of the Echelon Cycling Podcast. We are available on all the different platforms. Subscribe to the channel. Comment down below who your ride of the week is. Should Mathieu van der Poel potentially have been disqualified? Probably not. But yeah, with that, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, have a nice day.